This is John Coe speaking about the future of zoos, the next 50, 75, and 100 years. This is a talk I gave at the Zoo and Aquarium annual convention in Australia in August of 2002. In February of this year, I had the opportunity to speak at the Future of Zoos Symposium hosted by Canisius College in Buffalo, New York. And then later, in May and June, I had the opportunity to do some research visiting 24 zoos and botanic gardens around North America and looking at their recent evolution and their plans for the future. Both of these events helped shape this talk. How do we predict the future? Well, first we have to understand zoo evolution. We need to study present trends. We need to know our biases. We need to make assumptions about predictions of global and regional trends, predict likely scenarios for ourselves, and stick our neck out. Understanding the past is also important in understanding the evolution of zoos. To begin with, let's use a popular diagram developed by Dr. George Rabb of Brookfield Zoo, which shows evolution of zoos and desired arrow into the future. Here's a real call to arms by Dr. Rabb. And it begins with menageries as living natural history cabinets of the past. Dr. Rabb wisely suggested that these older forms will continue into the future as well as they will evolve into newer forms. So it's important to remember that in the ancient times there were royal menageries. There are royal menageries today among wealthy sheikhs in the Middle East and among wealthy entertainers in North America, and there will be private menageries in the future. Modern zoological parks will evolve into newer forms, but they will also continue in their present form, probably quite far into the future. Zoos will evolve into conservation centers and environmental resource centers, as Dr. Rabb predicted, as we move into the 21st century. But these forms will also continue into the future, and we will have new forms that we can scarcely imagine today. Studying the present involves travel, involves a global perspective. These are locations where I've had the opportunity to do research or do projects, and I know many people in the zoo industry and wildlife conservation industries travel very widely. And so it's very important to have a global perspective on these issues. Field work is an important place to find out about the present. This is an example of a project I have in Kerala State in India. Peer communication is very important, whether it's attending conferences, reading peer-reviewed journals, informal communication with our peers, or attending celebration in Bamiyan province in Afghanistan, where I've been working with the United Nations Environment Program. We also need to be very aware of exciting new changes in animal management. Things like reward-based training, environmental enrichment have had an enormous impact on zoos just in the last few years and will continue to have a major impact not only on zoos but also in wildlife sanctuaries. These are important new directions. What about advances in exhibits themselves? Philadelphia Zoo has done some very interesting work interconnecting exhibits throughout the zoo with a series of raceways or treetop tails, as they're called. These are projects I help them with, and they help link distant parts of the zoo so that the animals can take themselves for walks, can enjoy a nice stroll through the treetops around the ground, can rotate through very large parts of the zoo, very much as animals rotate through their habitats in nature. These are exciting new directions. And knowing our client has always been important, will be even more important in the future. And we know our clients both through science and through empathy. What about our biases? Do we have a North American or Eurocentric bias? But what about India, China, and Brazil? What about these predicted economic leaders the next half century? How should that affect our thinking? And what about our economic bias? Are we only considering the future of zoos for people like us, the wealthy people of the world? Most of us are from highly successful zoos, and so we tend to think of the elite zoo and their excellence and their exciting programs as a pinnacle of zoo evolution. But do we balance this against the collective impact of all of the world's zoos, the good, the bad, everything in between? How does it balance out? And if worse comes to worse, are we more committed to saving zoos or to saving wildlife? Climate change is certainly impacting the world. Those of us in Australia are probably closer to it than many others, but certainly large areas of North America are ablaze with bushfires as I speak. A major drought through the central U.S. is diminishing farm production, which is in many ways feeding the world. Ice caps are melting, sea level is rising, coral reefs are being bleached. All this stuff is definitely happening. There's no question about it. The only question is, how far will it go and when will it peak? But climate change isn't the only threat. Overpopulation is probably the original threat. Caused a lot of these other problems and is making the future far more difficult for everyone. Then we have a consumption economy, which has been mining the world's non-renewable resources to flood the world with throwaway objects. Clearly this is not sustainable. It has led to considerable resource depletion. Yes, there's still plenty of carbon-based energy in the world, but the price of it, the environmental cost, the physical cost, the social cost of extracting it is getting higher and higher. At some point, we have to find a renewable alternative. This is happening. It needs to continue to happen, and that happening needs to accelerate at a very great pace. We're also facing interrelated financial chaos. What will our future be if the Eurozone collapses? What will our future be if the American economy never succeeds in taking off again? What will our future be if all the world economies take off again, but solely based on consumption economy? All of these things will have major impact on our futures and on the future of zoos. And of course, all this unrest leads to military conflict. Let's not forget that the Arab Spring started as riots over food shortages. Riots over food shortages in India and Pakistan have occurred recently, will start occurring again. Massive famine in Africa, other areas of the world. We see it now, we'll see it in the future. All of these things combine to create a perfect storm. This then is our greatest challenge. This perfect storm of cascading effects from all of these challenges, all of these impacts. And the sooner we deal with it, the better off we'll be in the future. Predictions for the next 25 years? Decline in consumption-based bubble plus climate change impact will result in a slowing in globalization. We're beginning to see a retreat to low-growth, community-based lifestyles in Western developed countries. I'm seeing this with my neighbors here in Australia. There's certainly strong movements in this direction in Europe and North America. These are very important directions. They need to take hold. They need to move faster. Consumption-based bubbles will grow for a while in new economies in Russia, Asia, and Brazil. Conservation triage is a very unattractive yet very essential activity for zoos today and conservation organizations globally as mass extinctions grow. The longer we put it off, the worse the outcome will be. Gated communities and gated economies will continue to grow. What about local zoo trends? We're also seeing cost escalation and supply uncertainty even today. Energy, water, animal collections especially, and revenue, animal food. Where will these come from in the future, and what steps can we take now? What about the cost of extreme weather events, and how do we plan for that? Again, the gap between the rich and the poor. Will zoos only become the playgrounds of the rich? Tropical animal diseases are spreading as the climate warms. We're seeing more incidents of avian malaria, human malaria, dengue, Hendra virus, perhaps even Ebola. These will continue to spread as the climate changes and will be major challenges in the future. We will have animal welfare activists in the future, but we also are faced by a new challenge, the anti-science movement. How will this affect our fundraising? How will anti-science activists affect our education programs? Future zoo opportunities. Where there's change, there's also opportunity. We can act now to increase resource security, energy, water, food, and finance, and many zoos are. Species specialization. It's still our choice, but soon it won't be. We will have fewer living animals and more technology in our zoos. We'll see the growth of the Techno Zoo, the virtual zoo, and the frozen zoo. During my tour of North American zoos, I saw several that are making noteworthy progress towards energy security. In the upper slide is Toledo Zoo, and below that the Cincinnati Zoo. Cincinnati Zoo now has a 2,000-car parking lot shaded by a photovoltaic. Both these zoos are now 20% self-sufficient in energy and expect to reach 50% by the year 2030. Denver Zoo has invested in a massive waste-to-energy plant, which will make them 50% energy efficient as well. And we're seeing this in a number of zoos, but there's much more to be done. Shallow green roofs are a nice feature of modern architecture, but we need a much deeper green architecture. We need buildings and infrastructure that harvest energy, harvest water, grow food, create habitat and delight. And the lifestyles that go with this deeper green architecture are also very important in moving into a sustainable future. We have an Unzoo opportunity of increasing non-invasive contact with free-ranging wildlife to help recruit more and more people into wildlife conservation. This is a growing trend, and it needs to grow a great deal more. The Techno Zoo is just a catchphrase I use for using essentially low-tech new innovations for giving animals more choices, more control over their own environments. We're seeing a growing trend in this, but it's just in its infancy and needs to go much farther. The Techno Zoo also provides opportunities to do amazing things like increase human-animal communication. These could be major advances. Frozen zoos will be very important in our future. They've been around a number of years and are very important in livestock industries, for example, and seed banks are very important in botanic gardens. I understand there are about 24 frozen zoos around the world, but their role will grow greatly in the future. Now is the time to collect germplasm from endangered species and declining founder stock while they're still available. In the future, perhaps we can use in vitro techniques for breeding endangered species or even vanished species. Whether this will lead to the Pleistocene Zoo, I'm not sure. It could, but perhaps not in my lifetime. The virtual zoo at present is a simple game, not a very serious trend, but the amazing trends in virtual reality, in 3D projection, a lot of things we're seeing in the new entertainment venues will either create major competition for zoos or can be incorporated in zoos to greatly improve their offerings to the general public. So everybody needs to really look at this and see how we can tie in these amazing trends to our long-term goals and needs. So in the next 25 years, we'll see regional zoos and emergent zoos continue to grow and develop stronger connections with free-ranging animals. Modern zoos will continue, but will tend to move towards more regional sanctuaries. We need large areas for breeding stock. We need large areas for geriatric animals, and we'll certainly be seeing a lot of climate change refugees in wildlife that we'll need to deal with. Virtual zoos and techno zoos will grow and merge and become important features. Frozen zoos become far more important. All these forms will continue to evolve as we move into the third quarter of this century. This is a time of really great change. We'll see consumption-based new economies will begin to recede in Brazil, perhaps in the Russian Federation, and other areas of the world that are resource-rich will no longer be resource-rich. This is the period where world population and atmospheric carbon are both predicted to peak and begin declining. This is a period of unprecedented global migration and conflict caused by climate change, rising sea levels, economic chaos. These will be very difficult times. We'll see global economic empires, globalization, and even some nations collapse and divide. This is the peak period of mass extinctions. This is the time when in situ conservation parks will be most threatened by climate change and by human population migrations and economic and political chaos. These are the times we need to prepare for. We'll see new networks of decentralized, low-growth tribal economies emerge, and of course life will go on. Feral and semi-wildlife will emerge as the dominant wildlife forms. Native animals, perhaps hybridized with feral species, will continue to evolve and speciate in areas restricted by transportation corridors, by human growth, but particularly moving into areas abandoned by deglobalization, by decentralization. And these will be the wildlife for the future. So moving ahead, we'll see the Unzoo evolving into third-generation conservation. We'll see other forms like neogen parks, which are totally novel to us today. And we'll see the continued interconnection of all these forms, but evolving in new ways, some unprecedented ways. There will be wealthy populations in the future, and research will continue in those areas. I think we'll see trivial kinds of things like boutique genetic manipulation to create chimeric pets such as hybrids between monkeys and cats that glow in the dark. Will we see Jurassic Park? Unlikely, but possible. More importantly, I'm hoping that we'll move into a third generation of conservation. If we consider preservation as the first traditional form of conservation, and we find reclamation as a second generation of conservation, we'll be moving into the third generation, which is accommodation, where humans and other forms of nature combine in mutualistic and symbiotic ways so that we all live together. No more artificial divisions between wildlife parks and cities, no more divisions between zoos and unzoos and non-zoos. Hopefully we'll all merge into one sustainable form of nature. Perhaps this is just my own personal fantasy, but I'd really like to see it happen. Assumptions for zoos beyond. Now it's science fiction time. We'll see new ecosystems and new human populations. All of these systems will begin to stabilize and balance. And yes, the world will go on. New third generation conservation, this form of accommodation, this is what I'm hoping for. We'll see new economic empires emerge. And we'll see technology again advance among the new wealthy communities. And then we get into some really exciting times, science fiction times. Imagine teleportation and time travel and off-planet zoos. Imagine you and your family teleporting and time traveling back into the center of a Pleistocene migration. And of course people will follow resources wherever the resources are, including areas off-planet. And as they move off-planet, they'll continue to take nature with them in some form, whether it's the Techno Zoo, the Frozen Zoo, or some other unimagined form. Definitely zoos will be part of our future, going far, far beyond what we can see today. So off-planet zoos, sure, why not? But until then, well, may we all live in exciting times.